Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's ACMP member webinar. Our topic today is building a culture and capacity for transformation as your lasting advantage, presented by one and only Aric Wood. My name is Dima Sirotkin. I'm the CEO at Penetron and was a ACMP board member, which is why I'm lucky to be here today and be your moderator. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tigerhall, today, whose support made this possible. Thank you again, Tigerhall, for being a sponsor. Also, we have several upcoming events to look forward to. So the first one is especially relevant for experienced change management practitioners looking for advanced high-level sessions. Change Management Masterclass Series is an interactive virtual experience featuring advanced in-depth sessions delivered over 6 weeks. Registration is now open on the ACMP website, so please go there and check it out. The next one is the 2026 call for speakers and webinars. It's now open and will be open until October 17th. So don't miss your chance. You have roughly a month. We're looking for thought leaders, industry innovators, and dynamic presenters who can engage a global audience and initiate thought-provoking discussions. You can find it on the ACMP website to submit your proposal already today. Next, if you enjoy the valuable insights and engaging content, we encourage you to take the next step and join ACMP as a member. You will be able to gain access to even more fantastic and informative content, exclusive resources, networking opportunities, and a supportive global community of change management professionals. Don't miss out. Become part of the ACMP today and elevate your change management journey together with us. Another opportunity is becoming a certified change management professional, or what we call a CCMP. It is a globally recognized credential established by ACMP. The CCMP is a good way for practitioners to prove their experience and knowledge, invest in their ongoing professional development, show their commitment to the ethical and professional requirements, and successfully apply change management best practices. In summary, it advances your professional credibility in this field. It is, the top certification that I'm aware of. So wholeheartedly recommend. Going forward, I also wanted to mention our resource library. So one of the most valued member benefits is exactly this, where you can access 10 years worth of member-only tools, webinars, conference presentations, and white papers. Resource library is consistently ranked as one of our top member benefits, so we hope you will take advantage of it. It's really worth it. Next, I also wanted to mention our upcoming member webinar. It is going to be on the 23rd of September at 6 p.m. ET. The topic is Radical Pivot, Leading Change While Seizing the AI Advantage. As a startup entrepreneur, I really recommend. AI is a big deal. Do not be left out. And be sure to register the event calendar at acmpglobal.org and discover other educational opportunities that might interest you. Okay, finally, let's get to today's webinar. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available in the resource library within 48 hours. All audio lines have been muted, and today's webinar will run until 1 p.m. Eastern. If you have a question during the presentation, post it in the Q&A. Questions for the presenters will be answered during and after the presentation. And be sure to join in the conversation and prompts from speakers in chat. And I think, Aric, if I understood you correctly, you would love for me to occasionally interrupt you if I think it's a good moment to ask a follow-up. So I'll occasionally do that. Yeah, finally, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenter. Let's see if we can switch a slide. Aric Wood is a seasoned leader in organizational transformation with over 2 decades of experience guiding Fortune 500 companies through strategic change. Currently serving as the Chief Strategy Officer at Tigerhall, Aric focuses on change activation, helping organizations embed strategic shifts into their culture and operations. His work emphasizes the importance of ongoing engaging employees at all levels to ensure sustainable transformation. Aric, over to you.
Awesome. I'm delighted. Thank you, Dima. Let me make sure we got the transition right. Do we have my slides up full screen?
Yes, that
Yes.
I
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I always love speaking with ACMP and speaking with my community change practitioners. So thank you for hosting me. I know many folks, but I want to make sure that anyone that doesn't know me, just to share a little bit about my background. I've been on a path of empathy since the beginning of my career. I started my career as a strategy consultant at Bain and Company, designing strategies for large organizations. Of course, frustrated, wondering why is it that they don't always work? Why is it that they don't always succeed? Spent some time then in Silicon Valley working in software companies, actually standing up strategy as a practitioner, and started to realize how hard it is to do the work that we do and try to bring things to life inside of large organizations. And then I spent the last 20 years of my career before joining Tigerhall as the CEO of Explain, where we worked principally with Fortune 500 and large organizations to design change activation programs. Out of that work came my book, The Strategy Activation Playbook, which really speaks to sort of how we bring a human-centered design approach to change activation. And I'm now working as the Chief Strategy Officer at Tigerhall, where we're trying to support the transformation office with the technologies that will enable transformation at scale. So with that, I wanted to share today something that's actually very near and dear to my heart. This is really a call to action for change practitioners because I see the world shifting really dramatically in our industry. I believe that we're at a really important turning point in the world. And as change practitioners, what I'd like to do, and a lot of the work I'm focusing on right now, is how do we start to prepare for the future and future-proof our industry? How do we make sure that the practitioners that do what we do are best positioned for the future? So what I want to talk about today is the accelerating pace of change. Why is that pace of change increasing? And how this is going to shape the future of what I will call, for today's purposes, the transformation office. What I mean by the transformation office, just by way of definition, is the sum total of all those capabilities, including change management, program management, learning and development, all the practices that we combine together in an integrated way to help the organization move forward together faster. I also want to start to position my perspective on what is the future durable advantage for organizations, which, spoiler alert, it's change. It's change capacity. So an organization's ability to change quickly. And ultimately, we are all the architects of this. So this conversation, hopefully today, will start to stimulate some thinking and some conversations in your organization about how we're going to evolve the practice of change inside of our organizations. So before we start, I just want to level set. I know that lots of folks are feeling like the pace of change is shifting. Love to get a sense of where people are in their organizations today. So not a technical poll. This one's a layup. It's how are you feeling? Tell me, are you feeling like you're managing more or fewer change initiatives than you were 3 years ago? I'm getting some answers in the chat, which might indicate where the poll's going to land. We'll see. More, definitely more, absolutely more. Marcelo says the poll's not coming up for me. Our tech support might be able to help out. Okay, looks like we've got a little more than the majority. Well, we've got 86% in the more category. So vast majority saying 86% more, very small minority saying 4% less, and 10% are lucky enough to be slow and steady winning the race. But the story is pretty clear here. I think the perception is that we are clearly picking up more and more work. I think as change practitioners, a lot of us are feeling like we're doing more and more work with fewer and fewer resources. And so ultimately, what we're trying to move towards is a figuring out how we're going to manage that increased workload with the fatigue that it's inspiring. If we look at the data, our perception is very much supported by that. So Gartner did some research just a year and a half ago that looked back over the last 10 years and basically concluded that the data is supporting what you all feel. We are seeing ourselves going from one or two enterprise changes a year to the point where now we're running in 2024 in this data at about 12 to 15 in certain organizations. So a significant increase in only a decade of the amount of change that we're feeling. Likewise, on that orange line looking down, what we're seeing is as a result, organizational support for change is on the decline. This is what's showing up as change fatigue. And I think the impact from a strategic perspective is that it's also increasing the activation gap. It's getting harder and harder to effectively execute change inside organizations. So, first point of view that I want to share is we are in a world of always on change. To the question in the chat, I want to speak next to why that is. But ultimately, we have to accept that the pace of change is accelerating and that this is going to create a challenge for us. So, as change leaders, we're going to have to be even better at bridging that gap between strategy and execution in an environment where we have even more constant disruption. Let's dive into why this is occurring. So, we're going to start with talking about technology. The pace of change in our world today is largely driven by the pace of technology. Technology drives innovation. Innovation drives then resulting shifts in organizations and organizational behaviors, product design, things that we're bringing to market, things that are actually helping us in our lives. So ultimately, the companies that are delivering those services and products to us, if the pace of change is increasing and the pace of technology is increasing, naturally the pace of the organizations are going to be increasing. We've seen, and lived in a world of Moore's Law for the last 60 or 70 years. So since the 60s, when this term was first coined, we recognize that compute power, which is a good proxy for technology advancement, doubled about every 2 years. And what was pretty predictable was that that was a linear process. So for the last 60 or 70 years, we've been experiencing that doubling pretty consistently. So up until about 10 years ago, we had a pretty consistent pace of change. What happened about 10 years ago is that we started to see the benefits of AI showing up in that compute power calculation. And estimates, when I did this research about 6 months ago, were that now we're seeing compute power doubling every 6 months. So that is 4 times faster than the world we were living in. What's a little scary about this is that this is already probably an obsolete piece of data. People are now saying it might be as little as 4 or 5 months. And what we know from the trend over the last 10 years is that it's actually exponential, not linear. So we've broken from Moore's Law. We are no longer living in a world that is defined by a pace of change driven by Moore's Law. We're living in a world right now where the pace of change in technology is exponential, not linear. So if we can look at that and recognize the curve we're shifting from, we used to be on that line in the bottom. We're now, as change leaders and humans, on this other line. And that pace of change is only going to continue to accelerate. And AI isn't the end, of course. We're also experimenting with quantum computing. We're seeing other converging technologies that are collectively accelerating the pace of change. So we should just be prepared that this is the world we're entering. So a couple conclusions from that data, just to kind of establish where we're at. I would contend that the pace of change is driven by technology. We can debate that, but I think there's probably a great consensus around that in terms of how at least it impacts business organizations in the world. We know that tech is now advancing exponentially, and I think we all feel it every single day, as evidenced by the poll. And therefore, I would argue that as we look at the future, change capacity is going to become the basis of organizational competition. We're now not going to be able to compete on things like cost effectiveness or productivity or market share. Those will all be products of our organization's ability to absorb, process, and succeed in changing their organizations constantly. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit, but my main thesis for this conversation today is this. As change leaders, we're going to be architects in the front line of this transition. We need to have a culture and a capability of transformation as our competitive advantage in the next age. So the good news is as change practitioners, we're on the front lines of this possibility. We've got a lot of opportunities before us, but we should also be very realistic that this is where we're headed. A culture and capability of transformation will be our competitive advantage. One thing I want to do, knowing my audience here, is first start to separate the words change and transformation, because I know a couple of you are going, well, wait a minute, transformation's a different field. For the purpose of our conversation today, I want to define it thus. Change management is about helping people to adopt a specific discrete initiatives, new systems, new processes, org structures, ways of working. A lot of times that feels like a change project, right? We're going to change this discrete piece or part. Transformation is broader and more strategic. So it's an enterprise-wide reinvention of how a company creates value, competes, or operates. Very importantly, transformation requires change management. So what we do as change practitioners is a core ingredient of an organization's ability to transform. Without effective change management, transformations typically stall because as soon as that strategy hits the people, we tend to see stalled transformation initiatives. So this is a very well documented reality, but the good news is that we hold some of the cards to the solution. And I'd like to think of us for the rest of this conversation as change management being the engine of adoption, transformation being the journey of reinvention, and that they're very much intertwined, right? So for those of us that are change practitioners, we're joining with our partners in the project management office, our partners in the finance team, our partners in learning and development to collectively string together the transformation capability in our company. So I know I'm going to get some emails about that definition, but I mean, that's the one I'm running with. If you've got other thoughts, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think this is a functional way to think about it. So with that established, the strategic imperative before us is this. We're in a world of always on change. So the successful organizations of the future are going to make that transformation capability their decisive competitive advantage. And at the people level, we need to change faster than our competitors. Our organizations have to get really adept at doing this. And our change capacity in our organizations will become the basis of organizational competition. So let me now define a little bit of what I'm talking about in terms of change capacity. And part of the reason I want to have this conversation with everyone is this. I want us as change makers to start being the change makers that start this revolution in our companies. So I'd like us to elevate our profession to being the antidote to this problem that we've laid out. So what I'm going to lay out now is a little bit of a definition that we can work with to start to have these conversations in our organization. So first off, change capacity is defined as the volume or bandwidth that an organization has to absorb and execute change. So it's basically our measuring stick of how much ability we have to absorb change in the world. I want to break it into two parts. So part one, change capability. This is about the structural stuff. This is about our change frameworks, our strategy activation approach, the software platforms that we're using, the technologies that we're using to level up our capabilities, how we're leveraging AI for content creation or other capabilities. This is structural stuff that can be built. But the other really critical part is the second part as well, which is change agility. And change agility is all about the people. So the speed and flexibility with which an organization can respond to change is a function of the people within. Are we an organization that's resistant to change? Are we an organization that's actually agile and embraces change? Do we think of change as something that's put upon us? Or do we think of change as one of our core capabilities and toolkits that will give us an advantage in the world? So we need to have a significant shift in people's mindsets in our organizations as well as the tool sets in our organizations. Thank you, Linda. You hit the nail right as I was saying it. Agility is a mental game. It's about a mindset. So let's unpack both of those concepts, change capability and change agility, just a little bit more, so we can kind of empower ourselves with some ways to talk about this internally. But collectively, those two things are necessary to build change capacity. I think of change capability as those institutionalized systems. So what are the skills, the structures that are going to enable change? So these are things like having a permanent transformation office. Today, in the current state, most of our organizations have these capabilities distributed to silos. So there's a change team over here, there's a PMO over there, there's maybe a learning and development team over here. We have informal connections, but we're not necessarily combined in one integrated force. In the future, I suspect that this change capability is going to come from having a more permanent, more cross-functional, always-on capability that reports to senior leadership and has a clear mandate to drive enterprise-wide coordination. Secondly, having a standardized framework for change activation. So I know a lot of us are pro-sci practitioners, others studied under Cotter, others studied with other organizations. There's lots of different methodologies around there, but what is our organization going to align around? What is going to be our lingua franca? It's probably more important that we have a common language than which language we speak. We need to make sure we get a standardized framework of change activation in the toolkit that supports that. We also want to make sure that we've got embedded leadership training around change to ensure that our senior leaders are leading in their roles. They're showing and valuing change as part and parcel of their day job. This is the most important thing that they can be doing. So we need to support leadership and middle managers and all the folks in the organizational fabric with the support that they need to do this. And then importantly, we need to build in real-time data dashboards and governance systems. So with new software platforms with capabilities to dig into data lakes and integrate across lots of our different platforms, we now have a lot of access to data that we didn't used to have to actually help us measure and manage our change and transformation programs. And so we don't have to be flying blind anymore. We can actually pull the data to not only understand if we're making the impact at the level of the KPIs, but if we're also starting to see those leading indicators around awareness and adoption happening to demonstrate our value. And then lastly, we need to have a library of the playbooks and the tools and repeatable processes that we can deploy to the organization, because to get that change capability built into the people, we need to enable and empower everyone to participate in making change. Secondly, I'd like to then talk about change agility. So the second part of the equation is around the people. If we get those skills and those capabilities built structurally, which is an exercise in building, we now need to fuel the culture with a capability to add speed and flexibility to the organization. It doesn't matter if we have that whole toolkit if as soon as it hits the people are resistant to change. So how do we shift that? So first and foremost, we need to make sure that our leaders are visibly modeling the change behaviors. They've got to show transparency, adaptability, continuous learning, and constantly be evangelizing that we as an organization value change as part of our cultural DNA and our core capability. We want to make sure that our incentive systems are aligned for this. So do we have incentive systems and recognition programs that are going to reward experimentation, risk-taking, the kinds of actions that we're going to have to take to be more entrepreneurial and innovative and inventive in moving to new places faster? We want to start to build capabilities around regular storytelling and internal communications that are celebrating successes, really highlighting the things that organization is doing that's new and innovative to encourage others to join the movement and accelerate into these different ways of changing. We have to very much create psychological safety. So I know we've all worked in organizations where they've said, hey, we want these values, we want innovation, but you get your hand slapped when you do it, right? We need to create psychological safety around the fact that we are all going to be change makers in the future. And an organization that's going to be successful has to embrace that and encourage that, even if we make failures and mistakes. And then finally, we need to make sure that we've got some capabilities for enterprise-wide change assessments, readiness assessments, learning programs to support and equip and enable the organization to be change makers. So collectively, this is the second part of the formula. I want to also touch on this question of what the transformation office is not. So there's three myths I hear a lot when I talk to folks about this topic. I hear number one, well, in our organization, it's basically a PMO. It's a project management office. Well, a PMO basically focuses on delivering projects on time and on budget, where the transformation office, in my definition, is accountable for actually driving strategic business outcomes. So there's a core difference there. It's about outcomes, not just delivery. Likewise, a second myth I hear is, well, this should be part of the strategy office, or it is a strategy office. But a strategy office has a different job. It defines where the organization needs to go, while the transformation office is actually ensuring that we get there and supporting and facilitating the process of realization and adoption. And then third, in our organization, it's a change management office. We've got a bunch of change management practitioners, and whenever a change comes down the pike from leadership, we get tasked to go out and make it so, right? Well, we've all done that job. That's a very challenging space. The change management office provides the tools and the guidance for actually managing change. We are the keepers of the methods, and we have the expertise around adoption. But importantly, a transformation office has to combine all of these things. So we as change practitioners have a very strong role to play in this, But in the transformation office of the future, we actually need to integrate our capabilities into one coordinated force. So my next point of view on this is that as a transformation office, what we want to do is start to bring this together. I hope that you're all going to go home and have these conversations with the folks in your organizations to start to espouse this idea that there is a job to be done by the transformation office, and we can define what that is. And we want to bring the pieces and parts to do that. I believe that the mission of a future-proof transformation office is to align, to accelerate, and to orchestrate enterprise-wide change. And each of those words is very meaningfully selected. So number one, we need to help align. We need to ensure that every initiative, every team, and every resource is connected to the organization's strategic priorities, creating a very shared understanding of the purpose and direction. So we need to start thinking of all the changes in our organization as a portfolio and thinking about how do we make the trade-offs and prioritizations to determine which ones are the most critical and aligned with our strategic objectives. So there's an alignment role that has to happen here. Secondly, we have to orchestrate. We need to be able to be the people that build the connective tissue between the functions, the business units, and the various geographies to start busting those silos, to start managing those interdependencies and driving cohesive execution. What's really unique about our profession is that we don't live in a vertical. We don't live in the go-to-market stack. We don't live in the finance stack. We don't live in this other department. We're horizontal. Change making is a horizontal business. And so we are in the position to have to actually build that connective tissue between all of those groups to bring our expertise to bear to help those groups rise and drive their strategic initiatives forward. And then lastly, we have a role to help accelerate. And this really comes into play in the culture side. In addition to driving enterprise-wide change initiatives, we're also driving the pace of those changes and driving the velocity of those changes. We're doing that by removing obstacles. We're doing that by helping to streamline decision making. We're providing the focused support and empowerment and tools and best practices to actually help not only those project teams, but those enterprise-wide transformation teams and all the people in the organization themselves be effective change makers. So we also have a train the trainer role here, which is really important. And so we have this opportunity to be accelerants in the system.
Aric,
So, yes, please.
there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that I think maybe this could be a good place to ask them.
Great.
And they relate to the how. So people asking, okay, how do I, convince my executive leadership team of this? It sounds beautiful. We need to do this. Yes. But then, how do we convince them to sort of shift? And then another question was, how would you suggest a practitioner influences their larger organization, which I think gets to a similar point, to get on board with this new way of doing change when the role is buried and siloed without a centralized OCM, but instead with practitioners within various business teams. Is it at all possible in that way to make any impact? Or do you need to kind of be the head of OCM and be the main advisor of the CEO to be able to make this happen?
It's an awesome question. And I know, I talk to a lot of ACMP members and we're distributed across all levels and all roles, right? Some of us are individual contributors who are doing change management as a practice. Some of us are leaders of change teams or transformation teams that maybe have a little bit more access to the C-suite. Very few of us actually have direct access to the C-suite. So the question of how, I think, comes down to a couple of things. As a note, Dima, we will share a playbook written on this content at the end of the session that people can take as a takeaway that has more content to unpack this. But philosophically, the way I would like to address this right now is to say this. One of the first things we as change leaders have to do is to start speaking CFO. So historically, one of the reasons that we've had a hard time winning resources or winning the case for why we should make these changes is that we don't necessarily have the hard data that our peers do. We don't get to come in with that report from the CRM showing exactly where our marketing spend is working and not working. We don't typically have lots of data on the key change indicators that are leading to those outcomes. So what I would encourage people to think about is doing two things right now. Number one, we need to start having conversations with the business and finance people about how they think about business cases. How do they look for justification? What's the data they need to prove the value? And we need to start equipping ourselves then with that data. And that probably means building two relationships in your organization. One is the finance and business folks to understand, how do we do business cases here? How do I prove the value? What are the key components of a dashboard that you would want to see from us to demonstrate that this is successful or that these resources are justified? And then also working with the IT folks to understand, where does that data live in the organization? Because we have a lot of this data that's available. We know we can go into the LMS and understand how many people took the learning program, how many people succeeded in that, what was their sentiment in the surveys. We can maybe talk to the HR team to get into the HRS to understand sentiment, or pulse surveys or reports that we're getting from people about whether, how they feel about this adoption. We might be able to look at the communications that are going out, or the chat streams, or our Slack streams to understand sentiment around things. So the data exists. It's just hard for us to get it. But if we work on number one, learning how to speak CFO and build a strong business case, and then number two, going out and getting that data by partnering with IT, we can now be more effective in building the business cases we need to work with first our manager, and then their manager, and then their manager, to start to elevate this. Lastly, and then I'll dive back in, I also want to encourage people to start taking the first part of this survey and start explaining why the pace of change is increasing. I think almost any senior leader who is, pounding the table saying we need AI, already believes that the pace of change is increasing. Let's show them the evidence, and then let's share with them the implications. The implications are what we're talking about here. So awesome. Thank you for those questions. So I'm going to turn the corner a little bit into the how, but also just give you a couple more pieces on the business case. When you start having this conversation with folks, this is a basic argument for why the transformation office must be a permanent capability. So if you're currently living in a world which is project to project to project change, part of our pitch has to be, that's not going to cut it anymore. We need to install a new layer over that. We are in a world of continuous disruption. So we know that change is no longer episodic. We now need a permanent capability to provide the structure to navigate those ongoing shifts. If we've got 15 or 20 projects going side by side, how are we coordinating them? How are we seeing what's working and what's not? How are we shifting quickly if the priorities change? So that's one reason that we need this. Secondly, we need to bridge strategy and execution. So the transformation office can be that connective tissue that we're talking about to ensure that those strategies are implemented effectively, and that we're translating that vision into measurable outcomes. So this goes back to the question of, we need to start becoming a little bit better at being data scientists and building business cases and showing value. And then it's also going to require a coordinated effort to institutionalize change in the culture. So we are also that train the trainer force that needs to go out and embed change leadership into the organizational fabric in order to make it a core competency. This has got to start with our leaders. I think people that know me know I'm not a tops down hierarchical change person. I very much want to build bottom up. But part of building it bottom up is actually working closely with the leadership team and with direct people managers to help them have these tools first so that they can share them. And then building peer networks of us among our partners to go out and be ambassadors for this. So we need institutionalized change. If we do this, transformation will become our edge as opposed to overhead. So we'll start to shift the perception of what we do as not being an overhead capability, but actually being a very strategic capability in our organization. And this is a movement that I would like us all to start in our organizations, because it's true. We're going to be able to equip the organization to be prepared for the future we're headed towards. And the good news here is that building that future-proof transformation office is a design exercise. We can actually design and build this. It doesn't have to be a lot of wishing and hoping that it's going to happen. We can actually sit down and start to be the architects of what this could look like. So as you start having these conversations with folks, as you start finding champions that are leaders that are going to help us to do this work, we should also come equipped with some plans and some suggestions of ways that we could approach this. The document that I'm going to share at the end of this actually has, for the people that are asking how, a sort of 11-step approach to the way that you might go about designing a transformation office. Too much content to cover today, but I just want to offer that it's in there, right? So if you've got questions about that, love to talk to you about it. But I've thought a lot about and talked to a lot of transformation offices that have been built already. What worked, what didn't work, what did you encounter? And I've tried to encapsulate that into a set of 11 steps that you can utilize either to build your transformation office, or to take the capability you have right now and audit it for maturity and understand where do we have gaps, where do we have opportunities. So to TBD, maybe that's another webinar another day. Um, so building that office is a design exercise. I would start by thinking about the organization that you're in and thinking about what's the right model for it. So what I would like to cover today is at the highest level, thinking about the right transformation office model. Currently, there's really no right way to do it. I'd love to come and say, this is what you should do. But the reality is it depends. What everyone hates to hear from consultants, but it does. The right way to structure the TO depends on your organization's size, on your complexity, on your culture, on the way that you're organized globally, on the types of business units that you have within, and the pace of change in your industry. So some industries are moving faster than others. Some have completely different business structures. That said, they all exist on a continuum from centralized to distributed types of models. So we'll look at the three models that are most prevalent. The first one is the centralized model. So this looks like a strong enterprise control, lots of consistency, lots of top-down transformation governance. We've got one way of working change. We do it consistently, and it's coming out of one office. The centralized model is what you're going to see in organizations like a Walmart, where if we're making one change here, we're making it everywhere in the organization. And it's very much a command and control kind of structure where that's effective. The advantages of this kind of a model, well, you get really rapid strategic alignment. We're not working on enterprise initiatives that aren't part of our strategic goals. You get good consistency and standardization. We're all ProSci, or we're all Cotter, or we're all McKinsey 7 Steps. You get visibility and control because we are actually, the dashboards the company are using are the same dashboards we're measuring all of our work on. And you get the scale and efficiency of doing it this way because you do have the support of those shared services and those repeatable processes that you're all aligned around. The downside of this model, because they always have downsides, is that you do see more bureaucracy and bottlenecks in this model. So it's harder to get new things done, and it's harder to pivot old things. So the start, stop, continue effort is harder to do in times of change. So that could be a real disadvantage in the future. You also have more distance from the business. So a lot of times what's happening on the ground doesn't make it up to the central command. And so you've got that gap of market reality and what we're trying to accomplish at the top. And it also leans a lot on one size fits all thinking, which we want to avoid. In the second model, the distributed model, this is the other end of the extreme. We see more autonomous business units leading transformation locally. We see the center playing a minimum or advisory role. So this looks maybe more like a Berkshire Hathaway, where independent business units with independent P&Ls, and they all have their own way of working. They all ladder up financially to the core, but at the edges, they're really tailored and aligned independently. Likewise, in a tech example, Google also looks a lot like this. In Google, the organizations, in order to harness innovation, have a lot of autonomy at the business unit level, at the market levels. So organizations, both from Berkshire Hathaway to Google, take advantage of this. We see that it leads to more local ownership and accountability. So those local units do have an ability to really design what's unique for us and what our needs are. We see faster decision making. There's less friction going up and down the chain. They can just do. And we see more tailored solutions that are targeted at the specific needs of what's required on the ground. But a risk here is that we've got a ton of fragmentation and redundancy. So you could be using 5 different change management methodologies in different groups, and they don't talk to one another. You could see inconsistent standards of ways of working, and you could see the limited strategic cohesion. So you might, at an organizational level, be making bad trade-offs because you're investing in this, you're investing in that, and these two things aren't talking to another or complementing one another. So there's some real risks to the distributed model. And then finally, the hybrid model is where if I had to pick one, I would advocate you want to end somewhere in this range. The hybrid model, in theory, combines central strategy and support with distributed execution across BUs and geographies. The secret is the balance, of course, like all things. Best of both worlds, whenever I hear best of both worlds, I always get a little skeptical, right? It's in our execution of whether that's true. So if it's properly executed, we have the benefit of central strategy and local execution. So we can decide at the central level, what are our priorities for our organization? What are the key types of changes, initiatives, and enterprise-wide transformations we want to drive in support of those things, and then now go. And we empower local teams to then apply our 80% core to their 20% tailoring required to be effective in their markets. We also have shared capabilities, and this is one of the important benefits of a hybrid model. We do standardize around our core. So we do standardize around our toolkits, our playbooks, our training, our data platforms. What is the data and technology platform that we're using to support our change activation efforts? What are the key structural things that we're going to align around our ways of working so that even if we are in different business units, we're speaking one common language and working off of common playbooks. And then we have some degree of mutual accountability because those local units are going to be responsible for outcomes, while the central transformation office will ensure that alignment and that support. So selecting the right model for your company in closing is really coming down to thinking about what your organization is, what your goals are, what your culture looks like, how you're structured. You need to be understanding your organizational size and your complexity to decide which of these works for you. You need to be thinking about your culture and your operating norms. And this is, I think, one of the most sort of underrealized things. Are you a culture that's highly entrepreneurial, highly empowered? Well, your culture is probably going to be much better off then with a more decentralized model than a centralized model, which is much more command and control. So if you put the wrong model into the wrong culture, it's not going to work. Likewise, your transformation maturity, have you guys already standardized around a common way of doing change or not? That's going to be a factor. And then in your organization, you need to look at your context, your pace, and the nature of change in your organization or in your industry. Some industries can be slower moving and deliberate, particularly highly regulated organizations where things don't change as quickly. Think banks, insurance. Other organizations, technology, for example, have to be fast and innovative and shifting. So that's going to be a factor in this. So lastly, and in closing, my last point of view today to talk about is I want to stress that if capability as an asset is the baseline, so if the baseline has to be in your transformation maturity, we have a common way of working, skills, playbooks, toolkits, change activation approaches, software platforms, tools and technology, then culture as a catalyst will be the differentiator in the future. We can all get to the baseline in our companies, but we need to be also very much the champions of building culture as a catalyst. That's what's going to differentiate one company from the next. We can all have the same toolkit, but if the people inside the organization are all change makers, that organization is going to win every time. So just a couple final thoughts to help you assess this. I think what a culture of change looks like is a big topic and probably its own webinar, but I'd like to at least look at these four things. One, we need to ensure, most importantly, that leaders are visibly modeling change behaviors. So if we can only start in one place, let's start with those conversations with leadership. We need to convince them of the business case of what we're talking about today. We need to convince them that the world is accelerating and that change is a core capability that we need, and we need to build capacity and agility. And we need to ask them to lead from the front. And we might need to support them by helping to equip them with the tools to do that. But as soon as they start doing that, they'll start the shift in momentum in the culture. Secondly, we've got to look at our incentive systems to make sure that they reward experimentation and collaboration, don't limit it. So that's a structural conversation to have with your people organization. We need to make sure that we start to equip people with the regular storytelling about successful transformation. So it's one thing to have people go out and do something. It's another thing to celebrate that they've done something effective and start the momentum, the snowball effect of other people saying, oh, wow, they've adopted that and they're getting celebrated for that. I want to do some of that too. So there's a human component to getting that momentum built, and storytelling is at the core. How do we celebrate publicly the successes we're having as we're on this journey? And then we need to build that psychological safety embedded into the team norms. This is going to be critical for us to make sure that folks have the sense that this is a culture that's going to support me taking these bold steps. Couple pitfalls and how to avoid them, and then we're going to take some time for questions. So I think if you want to avoid sort of being a nice to have, right? We don't want our capability as change practitioners to be a nice to have that we bring in on occasion. And rather, we want to shift the conversation to how our profession can be the C-suite's secret weapon. We've got to move from becoming a flavor of the month by ensuring that we've got that C-suite sponsorship, that deep alignment with both the sponsorship from the C-suite and alignment with the strategic priorities. So you got to start making those relationships, building those conversations. We don't want to get stuck only in execution mode. We've got to move out of this project-based mindset and start thinking about how we get a seat at the strategic planning table, having conversations around how does this project align with that project, and how do these two projects align with our strategic objectives. So we want to level up the level of conversations we're having to make sure that we're having strategic conversations, and that'll help us accelerate to that table. We want to stop having that resistance from business units by building strong relationships and engaging co-creation. So I think one of the most important powers of a change maker is going out and building strong relationships. You might be able to force a project through once, but if you burn bridges while doing it, you're never going to do it again. Better to go out and build strong relationships with these organizations and have people recognize that you're there to actually build the bridges and the connective tissue for their success. We know leadership turnover happens. So we need to make sure that these things are aligned with the most important strategic priorities of the organization. And then regardless of who the leader is, we're still solving for the organization as a whole. And then change fatigue, I'm going to close with that. Change fatigue in the feeling that we have insufficient resourcing, a lot of that is actually about how we go about change. So one size fits all campaigns were fine when you had one or two, but now when you have 15, if you're doing a one size fits all change campaign, that means every employee is experiencing 15 campaigns. We need to start to move towards more tailored change activation that's role specific and providing individual leaders, individual roles, individual stakeholders, targeted change activation campaigns of communications, learning, development, etc., that is very specific to their role and what we're asking of them for that particular change. What will actually happen if we do that is change fatigue will drop because now I'm not getting overwhelmed by everything. I'm just getting what I need when I need it, just in time. So we want to also look at ways that we can scale that with AI and technology and platforms to be effective. If we do this, we end up being the secret weapon to the C-suite. And this is where I'd like to see us go in the next no more than 3 years. I think the organizations that are going to be successful are going to see by 27, 28, 29 that we are successful because we're better at change than our other organizations that we're competing with. So your challenge for me today is this. I'd love you to go out, number one, and assess your current transformation capability against those three models. Where should we land as we start thinking about the architecture of the kind of transformation office that will unite the powers of these different silos? Secondly, start a conversation internally about evolving and future-proofing a transformation office. So this is a conversation to have among your peers, with your manager, hopefully with your manager's manager, and we want to start a change movement inside in support of this. So we know how to do this. We're good at change. We're now going to do an enterprise-wide change for ourselves. And I think it's going to be in the best interest of the organization. And then as we're going along the journey to stay relevant, just ask yourself these questions. How have we made our system adaptive? So have we built the systems and processes that we've designed in a way that can scale to always on change? What is our process to ensure we're investing in people and culture? If we're building the transformation office and we're not also running an enterprise-wide transformation effort around culture, we won't be successful. So we need to be making sure that we are the advocates for this. We need to be able to prove the value in real time. So how have we learned to speak CFO? How have we talked to the IT department to go out and get all the data we need so that we can build business cases and dashboards to prove our efficacy? And then lastly, how are we embedded in both strategy creation and execution? We want to move ourselves upstream from being assigned a change initiative to seeing the change coming and being at the table helping to design how we're going to bring it to life. So I want to thank you with that, Demon. I think we can open up to questions. And I will
Yep.
share, we're going to drop a link into the chat with a playbook that unpacks some of this content as well as the how answers in the chat. So I do want to make that available to people in addition to the slides. So with that, thank you very much for this time. Let's see if there's any questions that we can address.
There's a bunch. There's a bunch. Okay, I'll start with something that I think is maybe a bit easier. Can you name an example of an organization using the hybrid model?
Yeah, actually, hybrid model is something that is used pretty consistently. So I'd say if you go to the hybrid model, you're going to look at organizations. We worked with Bank of America, for example, which, though it is a centralized organization, recognized that there had to be a lot of geographic tailoring. So it's an example where you've got an organization that has a lot of governance, would typically be something that might be using centralization more often. But because of the nature of the business model, which is we have different geographies with different regulatory environments, with different languages, cultures, et cetera, we actually have to have a strong core. but we also have to delegate and empower a good amount of decision making on the fringes in the geos in this particular case. So I think that's a really good example. Also, product companies, so organizations. Johnson comes to mind. We've worked with a number of um, healthcare companies that are product focused, where we have similar sorts of situations where there's a strong central core around the brand, around the culture, and around sort of the belief system and even the regulatory environment. But local markets or different product groups have different requirements and needs. And so a hybrid model is more effective to be able to sort of center the core at a 60 to 70% level and then tailor the remaining 30% out on the fringes. So I think those are good frameworks to look at, places where you've got a strong central international brand, but with local either business models or geographies.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Aric. Another question is, do you believe that, if we move to this, the future that you envision here, that this transformation office of the future effectively makes external change practitioners redundant?
Oh gosh, no. I think, well, do you mean, Deem, I assume we're talking external change practitioners as like consultants?
I believe that's what they mean, yes.
I hope not. I don't think so. I think, as a recovering consultant myself, I recognize that consultants oftentimes get a bad rap. But the reality is, consultants are necessary because they have concentrated subject matter expertise. So, very few organizations are highly mature as it comes to change. Very few organizations have a sufficient amount of change expertise in-house. So as we're making this transition, I feel like in the near term, change management practitioners who are expert consultants are going to actually be in great demand to help come in and set up these organizations. If you're a consultant, I think you could actually make a practice out of some of what we're talking about here, because a lot of organizations don't know what they don't know. And they're going to need to engage in subject matter expertise to say, for the change management component of this architecture, can you help us design the best practices? So I'm actually bullish on the role of change expertise as consultants in this future world.
Awesome, awesome. And another question that is very interesting, and I think probably many asking, is what is your advice for when the change management office is aligned to HR rather than the transformation office? It
Go
feels
all
like a difficult structure.
So I see this a lot. And some of you are saying, well, what if it's the CIO and what if it's the CTO and what if it's the CFO? If you're in the CFO, great. That's an awesome place to be. If you're in those other places, what I think you need to do is start to have the conversation about how we need to widen this a little bit. I think if you are tied into any of the C-suite, you have an advantage already because you've now got access to the C-suite and you have a seat, a representative seat at the table. So that's step one is get to one of those C-suite sponsors. And if it's a function, that's fine. That's a great starting point. The next point of evolution, however, is that you need to start learning to speak CFO. You need to start thinking about business cases. You need to start thinking about strategy. And then when you, as representative of the transformation office, even if your sponsor is the people organization, you're speaking at a strategic level about its impact on the broad organization. So that's the key thing: is move out of the function and make your conversations horizontal. How is this, as manifest through the people in our organization, going to impact the business units, the strategy, the enterprise, et cetera, and elevate the conversation to that level? That's going to help you build your brand and basically go wider and have more impact. Because what you ultimately need to do is make allies of all those other chairs at the table.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. We have another one, which is, I'll admit, as a CEO of an AI company, I couldn't pass by, but it wasn't me who asked it, I promise. Someone asks, how do you think AI will affect the change management field?
I want to see AI be like a jetpack on change management, right? So, so I work at Tigerhall. My focus in this was really to share real value in conversation, but I will say part of why I've moved into technology from consulting around change activation is that I think we're in a pretty exciting time right now where AI tools can actually be a force multiplier for us, AI and automation generally. But if we can start to do things like, for example, 10 years ago, we did a global rollout of enterprise strategy and it had to be translated into 7 languages. Well, That took months. It took $150,000. Now end users in our organizations can instantly consume the content that we're sharing as change managers in their native language in one of 33 tongues on their phone, right? That is incredibly valuable as a very small use case to say, how does AI going to change our world? Well, it's going to make the user experience in change activation much better. Likewise, on the transformation office team, if you can now take that 100-page PowerPoint that we got from Bain or McKinsey and say, hey, AI, will you help me turn this into 6 podcasts tailored at these 6 different roles in the organization and tell project managers in Australia exactly what they need to know from this huge deck? They're absolutely, number one, going to consume it more effectively than going out to a SharePoint and reading the whole 100-page point deck. And number two, that change leader has the ability to build those 6 podcasts in 10 minutes. So it gives us the ability to deliver those personalized change experiences at a stakeholder specific level in the same way that our marketing brethren lead marketing campaigns. We can get down to the level of building change activation programs using AI and technology that will allow us to truly deliver tailored change programs that are both more effective and reduce change fatigue at the same time.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. What role does resiliency building have in the culture necessary for transformation, and what's your best recommendation to foster it?
It's right now, I think somebody else said it best. It's a mindset shift. So, we as humans, I think, have an incredible capacity for resilience. I think in organizations, we have a skepticism about change. And so what we need to start to do is harness the reality with people that we shouldn't be looking at change as something that's happening to us. We should look at change as an opportunity for us to advance ourselves, our roles, our goals, and our organization. And if we get really good at it, we'll be superheroes. That mindset shift is really the most important thing to start shifting for us to be able to be a resilient culture because it starts basically at every single person. So how would I approach that? I think, again, we want to start by architecting this as a cultural priority, making sure that our leaders recognize the value of it. And then we work with our leaders to begin role modeling it so we can start that momentum so that we can empower people to do this successfully. If they do that, I think people are going to be more satisfied and more successful in their personal lives as well as their organizational lives.
Awesome. With this, I want to thank everyone for participating in this ACMP webinar today. And I would especially like to thank Aric for the wonderful presentation and Tigerhall for being a sponsor. Immediately following the webinar, the feedback survey will pop up. Please take just a minute to complete our survey. Your feedback helps a ton to shape future webinars. Also, if you're a member, don't forget to join the webinar exchange community in ACP Connect to continue the conversation and engage with our speaker and fellow participants. And over the next 48 hours, the recording and slides will be sent to all registrants via email. For members, the recording and slides will be in the webinar section in ACMP's resource library, located on the ACMP website. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.